I could talk about the book till the cows come home, but I thought the best way of explaining to you what I'm trying to do with it would be to read you 2 or 3 extracts from it, just so you can get a feel for the kind of thing that I'm trying for. So, with your gracious permission, that's what I'll do now. This first one is one of my favourite stories, which deals with perhaps one of the most notorious gentlemen's clubs in history, which is known slightly erroneously as the Hellfire Club. It was actually called the Friars of the Order of St Francis, but it was a Hellfire Club, one of many, but it's usually known as the Hellfire Club. So the headline here is of the Earl of Sandwich attacked by Mr. John Wilkes's baboon. And this, I should say, is written by the newspaper's fictional gossip columnist who goes by the name of the Seven Dial Stroller, which is why it's written in the first person. So here we go. I have often scandalised you with news of the infamous and lewd practices of Sir Francis Dashwood's Hellfire Club, the Friars of the Order of St Francis. Yet, though the old libertine is appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, a position of respect and emolument, he lately allows his sensualist confederates even greater licence at Medmenham than heretofore reported. Rumour reaches me that the friars lately performed a black mass, during which they screamed imprecations at God and dared him to prove his existence. Unbeknown to most of those present, Mr. John Wilkes MP had procured a baboon, perhaps from his fellow friar Sir Henry Van Sittart, the Governor of Bengal, arraying it in a devil's garb and concealing it in a chest kept by the friars for the purposes of storing their accoutrements of their diabolical ceremonies. This chest was secured with a spring lock, to which the sneaking dog Wilkes had tied a cord, running it under the carpet to his customary chair, that he might lay his hand upon it at an apposite juncture. Growing weary of the ungodly ceremony unfolding before him, Wilkes of a sudden released the baboon from its skulking hole, whereupon it leapt onto the altar, and then onto the shoulder of the startled fool Lord Sandwich, who is said to have addressed the creature in the following manner: "Spare me, gracious devil, spare a wretch who was never sincerely your servant. I have sinned only from the vanity of being in fashion. I never committed 1,000th part of the vices of which I boasted. Take someone else, they're all worse than I." Taking pity upon his lordship, one of the party was able to defenestrate the baboon, who showed greater sense than his jailers in quitting the scene and has not been heard of since. Wilkes was inveigled into this circle of voluptuaries by the late Mr. Thomas Potter MP, the Vice Treasurer of Ireland, a man so abandoned to vice that he once boasted of sodomising a cow on Wingrove Common in the county of Buckinghamshire. So that's a sandwich. This is an obituary of a woman who perpetrated perhaps the most infamous fraud of the 18th century, and it was satirised by many subsequently, including the mighty William Hogarth. So this is an obituary with particulars concerning the perplexing case of the late Mary Tofts, who gave birth to 17 rabbits. Infamous indeed are the offences of Mrs. Mary Tofts, but in the light of her death this month, we think it fit to remind our readers of the circumstances of her very curious history and her most undeserved celebrity. Mrs. Tofts came to public prominence in April of the year 1726, when she fell ill and took to her bed after she was startled by a rabbit in a field at Godalming in the county of Surrey. Shortly thereafter she gave birth to a litter of rabbits, to the astonishment of all about her. An apothecary, John Howard, attended the new mother and sent word of this unaccountable event to his acquaintance Nathaniel St Andre, anatomist to his late Majesty King George I. St Andre set out for Godalming in the company of Samuel Molyneux, Secretary to the Prince of Wales. These esteemed gentlemen examined Mrs. Tofts, and as they did so she was delivered of more rabbits and rabbit parts. Mr. St Andre published a pamphlet describing the affair, which was purchased in very great numbers in London, and Mrs. Tofts' fame grew immeasurably, with a surfeit of news sheet articles, ballads, squibs, and popular prints feeding the public's appetite for intelligence of her case. Yet many sceptics voiced grave doubts regarding the probity of Mrs. Tofts, and the king himself soon made his own suspicions known. His Majesty dispatched another of his physicians, Cyriacus Arles, who reported that he thought the business a base deceit. Sir Richard Manningham was then charged with the duty of discovering once and for all the truth of the matter. Manningham had Mrs. Tofts brought to London and lodged her at Lacey's Bagno in Leicester Fields. He observed the woman secretly for 3 days, and by this method discovered the fraudulent nature of the births. It happened that Mrs. Tofts had sent a porter to Covent Garden Market and had him purchase for her there a rabbit. When pressed on the matter, she confessed that she had concealed the creature within her privities and counterfeited the pangs of childbirth to mislead the world. Mrs. Tofts made a full confession of her deception before a Justice of the Peace and in the presence of the Duke of Montague and other witnesses. She had been with child in the year 1726, but miscarried, and her husband had subsequently invented the rabbit scheme that they might profit by its novelty. Since the pair was thwarted in this avaricious plan, it was resolved that Mrs. Tofts should not be brought to trial, and she returned in shame to Godalming. So this next one is, I think we can probably all agree that gin was sort of the crack cocaine of its day in the 18th century, and this is a cautionary tale about the evils of unfettered access to gin. This is an account of the terrible conflagration at Mr. Langdale's gin distillery, begun by Lord Gordon's anti-papist mob. The city has not witnessed tribulations to match the late riots incited by the lunatic anti-papist Lord Gordon since the terrors of the Great Fire, and no crime amongst the many perpetrated in protest at the repeal of laws governing Catholics was so confounding as the wanton pillaging and destruction of Mr. Thomas Langdale's distillery. Mr. Langdale's popery had gained common currency, and the mob, having heard intelligence that a papist chapel was to be found on his premises in Holborn, marched upon the distillery in great numbers at around 9 o'clock on the evening of the 7th of June. The garrison deployed there to defend Mr. Langdale and his family of 12 children, and the houses of many of his labourers, had been called away to secure from attack the Bank of England. As a consequence, the mob effected an unchallenged and violent entry to the establishment, and papers, furniture and chattels were soon piled up and set alight in the street. A fire was likewise begun within the buildings themselves, and a wind got up which served to fan the flames into a terrible inferno in very little time. The blaze burst free of the distillery's confines, consuming other houses in Holborn, and crept towards the Fleet Market. Not content with this, certain ruffians appropriated 2 fire engines and used them to pump gin from the stills in the distillery's cellars, which they decanted into buckets and sold for a penny a mug to their riotous confederates. Many of these did not wish to pay for their drams, however, and charged into the flaming building in order to fill whatever receptacles they could find with Mr. Langdale's gin. The great heat from the conflagration took an insupportable toll upon the stills, and they burst with a terrible force, driving the gin upwards and into the streets, where it ran down the gutters. The turbulent intruders were delighted at this, and threw themselves to the cobbles in order that they might lap up the spirituous rivulets into their bellies. The gin being unrefined and poisonous, it seared their gullets and those of their ragged-arsed wives and children, and a host of convulsive, inebriated and choking scoundrels were to be seen rolling about in the streets in torment. Countless insensible and ungovernable people were trapped within the premises and burned to death. A vat holding 120,000 gallons of liquor was set ablaze, its worth being estimated at £38,000. To get a modern equivalent, I think you have to multiply by about 55 or something. And the Vesuvian eruption this occasion was visible within a compass of 30 miles about the city, according to many of this news sheet's correspondents. The tardy arrival of the Northumberland militia restored a little order to the scene, and they fired upon pickpockets who were looting indiscriminately both the injured and the intoxicated, and the charred corpses of the demised. This is, well, I'll just read you the headline. This is of Mr. William Hickey's good-natured harlot and her ability to piss with outstanding accuracy. You will never find a fellow better acquainted with the most frolicsome women of the town than Mr. William Hickey. He was pleased to play host on the 19th of last month to Lord Fielding and a party of roisterers at the Bull Tavern on Shooter's Hill, and made sure to invite only his most intimate circle of abandoned favourites, chief amongst whom was the incomparable Miss Pris Vincent. The ever full-bladdered Miss Vincent has a singular knack of squirting her wine across a table with such precision that she is able to fire into the neck of a quart bottle. Lord Fielding had heard claims that she possessed such an ability, but could not credit them, and inquired of Mr. Hickey as to the veracity of these assertions. Hickey assured him that he had more than once seen her perform the feat, whereupon his lordship beseeched him to arrange for the party to witness it. Hickey asked Miss Vincent to oblige the party with a demonstration, and since she had imbibed a great quantity of wine, she readily assented, and desired Mr. Hickey to do her the honour of being her bottle holder. He was happy to do so, and took up a champagne bottle while Miss Vincent placed herself opposite. He stood at the side of the table holding the receptacle with his mouth in a slanting direction towards her. Drawing up her petticoats, she dexterously contracted and manipulated the lips of her privities, that word again, so as to produce a narrow stream which described a graceful golden arc, so correctly aimed that at least 1/3 of her water actually filled the bottle. Lord Fielding's mirth at this singular accomplishment was so great that he was near suffocation. If anybody here feels they'd like to reconstruct this scenario this afternoon, feel free. Thank you very much for listening. You've been very kind.
Can I just say